Hi, welcome to Evidence for Faith. It's your host, Michael Lane. Oh, I'm so glad you're joining me, and I hope you're enjoying this series on Goliath. This is so interesting. What we've learned so far in these different lessons that we've had is that he was a Philistine. He's from Gath. His name was Goliath, and he was a champion. Well, now we're going to take a look at something else. This is the critical part that everybody knows about Goliath. He's a giant. He's pretty tall dude. This guy is pretty big. How big is he? Well, let's dive into the scripture and examine what this is. And then, what evidence is there to support this? So, let's see and talk about the height of Goliath. So, along with that, let's go to the fourth thing I want to point out today, out of that passage that we just read previous. It says that his height was 6 cubits and a span. Okay, this is what Goliath is so famous for, was his height. Now, the Hebrew nation, because this was written by Hebrews, the Hebrew nation had two different sizes of cubit, two different types. There was the short cubit and a long cubit. The long cubit, this is a facsimile of a cubit, of a long cubit. A long cubit's about 51, almost 52 centimeters in length, or that's about 20 and a half inches long, if you will. Now, this cubit, this would be the long one for being measured, and if it was this type of a cubit, if it's the long cubit, this would have made, because it says 6 cubits, that would have made him approximately 3.18 meters high, 3 meters and 18 centimeters. Or, putting it in the English American thing, that would be a little over 10 feet, about 10 feet 2 inches in height. Now, the Hebrew short cubit, if that was what was being used, his height would have just been much smaller than this. The height would have been just a little over 2.5 meters in height. So here I am just 5'11", and you can see this comes up to just my waist. Put another one on top, we're just a little bit higher, and then just a small amount more added to that if it's the short one. So about another half of a meter. Or, to put it simply in American terms, that would be about 8'9" high. But that's not all. The text also says he was a full span tall. Now, what's a span? A span is the space, the distance between your thumb and your little finger when your palm is extended thus. That's a span. So a span, it varies a little bit, but the span is roughly about 23 centimeters, roughly about 9 inches. That's a span. Thus, the height for Goliath, according to the English Standard Version and most translations, is either about 3.14 meters, that'd be 3 meters and a little bit more, 41 centimeters, or about 11 foot 2 inches. That's for the long cubit. For a short cubit, it would have only been about 2.8 meters long and about 9 foot 5 inches. So now the reason I say according to the English Standard in most translations, there's two translations in particular, the Net Bible, New English Translation, and the Septuagint, the Greek translation, ancient translation of the Old Testament. They do not record 6 cubits in a span. They record Goliath as being 4 cubits in a span, which, if that's true, Goliath's height would have only been a little bit over 2 meters. And a meter is just a little bit longer than 3 feet. So he wouldn't have been very high. He would only have been about 6'9" if that was the case. Now, why this major difference? Why do most translations have that, but the Septuagint and the Net Bible don't? It's because most translations are based upon the Masoretic text, which I believe is a very, very accurate, one of the most accurate ancient texts that we have of the Bible. And that is the one that the English Standard is based on, and many others. That's why we have that. It differs than the Septuagint. It also, if we want to get into the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a Dead Sea Scroll. It's labeled 4Q Sam, for Samuel, Part A. And it is, it states, well, first of all, that dates back to only 200 BC. But it too says in its copy of the book of Samuel that it was the shorter version, that it was using a smaller, the shorter cubit. But Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint, compared to the Masoretic text and many other ancient documents we have, Goliath seems to have been measured by using the long cubit. It was the most standard cubit of the day, that length there. Personally, I believe and I have more trust in the Masoretic text than these other ones. And I have difficulty accepting that Goliath was just, a little over 6 feet high. That just doesn't seem logical. Why? Let me give you some logic to this, and let's see. First of all, if Goliath is under 7 feet tall, okay, if he's under 7 feet tall, why were the Israelites so frightened of him? I mean, Saul, it says, is head and shoulders above everybody else. Saul was a tall person, yet Saul didn't invoke fear and terror in people when he walked around. So that doesn't seem logical that Goliath would have been only a little over 6 feet high. I don't accept that. It doesn't seem to fit. Second, the armor that we see that is described in 1 Samuel chapter 17 is not the armor for someone who's only about 6 feet high or even 7 foot high. This person had to be much, much higher to be able to move around and utilize this type of weaponry and armor that the Bible says he had. Thus, according to logic would dictate Goliath had to have been of the superior height to his counterparts, just using straight logic and the Masoretic text. The Bible also mentions that there's other giants. Other giants are mentioned in the Bible. As a matter of fact, if you study ancient history, almost any ancient culture, you're going to find that they all mention giants. Egyptians, Assyrian, Babylonian, Chaldean, Hittite, they all have references to giants. Almost anywhere, you're going to find ancient references to giants. Now, in the third part of the series, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, we're going to have a series dealing with that. I don't want to get too much into that today, but I do need to bring up something that is really important because it fits really well with this. And that's a lesson on the Anakim. That's spelled Anakin, the Anakim. The Anakim are mentioned in many Bible passages, but one of the most interesting, and to the point it helps us with this lesson to understand, is from the Exodus and the conquest. It deals with the spies that Moses sends out into the promised land after they've crossed the Red Sea. After their mission was complete, these 12 spies come back and they gave a report. Now, 10 of these 12 spies give an unfavorable report of going into and settling in the promised land. Why? Because they mention giants are there, and they were greatly feared. Matter of fact, if you pick this up in Numbers chapter 13, verses 28 and 29, and also verse 33, as we read this, see what it says about this Anakim, these giants. And it reads, "The people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites dwell in the hill country. The Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we've seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, so we seemed to them." That is describing the Nephilim. Like I say, we'll talk more about that in the next lesson in this series. But it was used to refer to giants, specifically here, the sons of Anak, who it says were of the Nephilim, the descendants of them. So most biblical scholars associate the Amorites with at least a tribe of these Anakim. Also, that's not the only place in the Bible we see this. In Numbers chapter 13, verse 22, we read more about these and we get a location of where these Anakim are. It reads, "And they went up into the Negev and came to Hebron, Anaman, Sheshai, and Talmai. The descendants of Anak were there." Okay, where is that? That's in southern Judah, south of Jerusalem, this area, a lot of that. But we're not done. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 2, verses 10 and 11, we're going to get some more on this. It reads, "The Emim formerly lived there, the great people and many, and tall as the Anakim. Like the Anakims, they were counted as Rephaim, but the Moabites called them Emim." Let's move down to Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 20 and 21. We read, "It is also counted in the land of Rephaim. Rephaim formerly lived there, but the Amorites called them Zanzumim, a people great and many and as tall as the Anakim. Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 2 reads, a people great and tall, the sons of Anakim. Now, you might be wondering, Michael, you have totally lost me. What has this got to do with our lesson dealing with Goliath? Well, I'll answer that by taking that, and let's add one more passage. Let's take a look at Joshua chapter 11, verses 21 and 22. This is where it gets really, really interesting about Goliath and this Anakim stuff. It reads, and Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron and Debir, from Anab and from the hill country of Judah, and all of the hill country of Israel. Joshua devoted them to destruction with their cities. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod did some remain. Did you catch that? That last part, where the Anakim still found after the conquest? Gaza, Gath, Ashdod, but it mentions Gath. Anakim giants are mentioned in these places, and they come in and they settled. And eventually in some places they settled around, they intermarried with people and stuff like this. But in verse 22, Gath is actually mentioned as the home of the Anakim giants, that there were some that were there. Not saying the whole city was filled with them, but there were some of these Anakim giants were living in Gath. And if you recall, that's the same hometown that Goliath comes from. Later, King David makes war against Gath, and again, we read about giants having to do with this place. In 2 Samuel, now David is king at this point, in 2 Samuel chapter 21, verses 20 through 22, we read about giants again at Gath. It reads, and there was again war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number. He also had descended from the giants, and he taunted Israel. Jonathan, the son of Shimei, David's brother, struck him down. These 4 descended from the giants of Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants.
Support the show. Become a donor at evidenceforfaith.org/give.